Weapons, shells, missiles, and so on. Later, they had to be unblocked in an emergency format, in emergency mode. So today we found out that, as it turns out, America, the Trump administration, the Pentagon blocked Ukraine from striking targets in Russia with ATACMS missiles and the British-French Storm Shadow missiles, because they are regulated and coordinated directly by US space intelligence, which transmits the coordinates accordingly. Ukraine and Zelensky probably finally broke away and realized, aha, you can't deal with this comrade at all. All these collective efforts are pointless. We have to rely on ourselves. Just like Israel and like many, many other states and countries. For this reason, missile programs are being developed successfully. I'm sure there are already at least 10 other Ukrainian missiles in development, and soon we'll hear about them. Even now, there are significant strikes being carried out against Putin's closest circle. Even now, we are completely undermining the situation inside the Russian Federation from within. Isn't that right? Because all these strikes have a direct impact on the political segment, on the political situation, on public sentiment, on Russia's economy, and on the social situation, because it's the ordinary people who suffer. They're the ones buying gasoline and fuel at the gas stations, while the Russian army gets it from Putin. And all those Putin orders are fueled up as needed, while it's the ordinary people who suffer, so everything is happening just as it was basically planned. Everything is going according to the established course. Everything is absolutely logical, and to be honest, this is good news. August 24th, 2025. There haven't been any good news for a long time, and finally we've heard at least something.
It's very important for us to remember when the Navy Day parade was held in St. Petersburg.
Fashion. You call that a parade?
Well, that's more like strolling, of course. It's a festive explosion in the territory of Petersburg and the Leningrad region, thanks to our drones. And now they've also attacked a place that's magical for Putin, Petersburg and the Leningrad region, a service. Don't you think this is symbolic? Because for Putin, Petersburg is a sacred city, and today Pulkovo is closed. The St. Petersburg airport, and there are drones flying there. I already checked this morning before our stream, and a couple of drones, because of Russian electronic warfare, ended up flying into the apartments of Petersburg residents. Sasha?
Well, look, this is a clear signal that the range is already good. If earlier Ukraine could only reach its own occupied territories at the start of the war, and then further along the Russian Federation border, and we saw that for a long time, then there were isolated strikes, long-range sort of test runs, trial balloons towards Tatarstan. You saw that. But after there were already special operations in Siberia, after Ukraine started striking and reaching such distant territories as the Irkutsk region, you see, for example, and so on, reaching beyond the Urals, up to the Urals, it reaches. So we are saying that, yes, Ukraine is signaling to Moscow that the range has changed, and that Ukraine is acquiring the capabilities and means to destroy any target, no matter how well protected it is, no matter what kind of rocks these mega bunkers are hidden in on Russian territory. You know, Dasha, there's one very interesting detail I'd like to discuss, because missile strikes are one thing, but you can't talk about them for the entire broadcast. Look, right now in Russia, very interesting things are happening, just really interesting things. A decision was made in the Kremlin. I'm not trolling right now, I'm being completely serious. The Kremlin decided that the Russian police cannot and will not be able to handle the so-called special military operation veterans. And that order in local areas, in cities, in the regions of Russia should in part be maintained by the Russian army, since it directly oversees and coordinates all of these, well, all these scoundrels who took up guns for money and went to kill Ukrainians, both civilians and soldiers. Accordingly, the question arises, if they are planning to hand this over to the army, and if the army will be maintaining order on the streets of Russian cities, does this mean first that Putin will bring troops into Moscow and St. Petersburg? First. Second, does this mean that over time, the Russian army will gain and continue to gain more and more power in Russia, and that the generals will become gluttonous with power? Something like a safety cushion, you know, just in case. If we end the war or freeze it, stop it. Yes, in one form or another. But at the same time, you keep getting money because the army is being deployed on the streets of Russian cities and regions. So does this mean that the generals will become even more influential? Third, does this mean that there will be an inevitable war between the FSB and the military generals? And she will be. Fourth, does this mean in principle that we will then gradually see a military coup or an inclination towards a military coup on the territory of Russia, Moscow, the Kremlin, Putin? Will this be accomplished? Because You see, there have already been times in the history of Russia, in the history of the Soviet Union, in the history of Moscow, when the generals removed an undesirable general secretary. This has happened before. More precisely, not even the general secretary, but a person who would very much like to become one. I recall the story of Beria and Zhukov. Isn't that true? How Khrushchev came to be, how the rest of the three came to be. Zhukov came and restored order, and Beria was eliminated. All of this is inevitable. And if this is happening, it means it's not just Putin trying to preserve some kind of flows for the generals. This is truly a major concern for the Kremlin, for Putin, for his inner circle, that a huge number of people will get their hands on weapons, that the regions will thus become isolated from Russia, that there will be a massive redistribution of property in the Russian Federation, that not even the 1990s will return, but God knows what years might come back. That there will be major coups, major uprisings, major armed rebellions. And Putin will not be able to handle all of this. He needs the army. But the threat arises that this very army could overthrow Putin in the coming years, as soon as he stops the war. These are the questions that need to be felt and analyzed right now. So what's already happening with us? So, Hinstein has appeared. Hinstein has appeared. In Rio, the governor,
Yes,
he is already the governor of the Kursk region. Attacks on the Kursk nuclear power plant are a threat to nuclear safety and cross all boundaries of international conventions. In short, they are disrupting the negotiations.
law enforcement.
They didn't know how to get out of all this. From Trump's proposal to hold one-on-one talks between Zelensky and Putin, they didn't know how to make it so that Putin wouldn't go anywhere. They didn't understand how to create a situation in which Trump would get angry at Ukraine. And bypassing the Europeans, they didn't understand how to knock out all these Trump cards in general. Well then, they went all in. Their last Trump card is a nuclear catastrophe, a nuclear threat. In this way, you see, they can reject Trump, they can prolong the pause, they can keep pretending, they can continue negotiations with the Americans, they can squeeze more concessions out of the Americans, while at the same time threatening Ukraine with shelling and everything else. Now, they're going to start deploying weapons on the territory of Belarus. Even because of this, look, we can see how Putin is now disrupting the negotiations. This is a breakdown of negotiations. I'm telling you, this is a breakdown of negotiations. The whole situation with the Kursk nuclear power plant is a breakdown of negotiations. That's what he needed. And notice, they're doing this in Kursk. They're not doing it in other regions of Russia, right? Now it's Kursk, where they don't really care anymore. And
now here's video evidence that everything Hinstein said is a lie. Let's watch.
Good morning. I want to reassure you. Everything is fine and calm in Kurchatov. There is no fire at the moment. Well, there was some noise at night. Something popped and flared up over there. But they put it out quickly. Everything is safe right now. Birds are flying around. The weather is gorgeous and sunny. Peace and kindness to everyone.
Rashid himself confirmed that something happened there, as you heard, using absolutely inappropriate language. I won't even repeat it. So, Sash, what is this?
it's a provocation. It's just like those tires at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant that supposedly weren't set on fire, let me remind you. It's the same kind of story. In other words, they provoke something. A small one, so as not to make too much noise, so there wouldn't be an explosion, so as not to repeat Chernobyl, which they themselves carried out here on Ukrainian territory, once upon a time. And they kept silent about that disaster. For a huge number of days, they simply concealed it. So this is a provocation, not an attempt. It's a disruption of negotiations. Listen, these things are just obvious. They staged the provocation themselves, carried it out themselves, and then discussed it themselves. Then they'll tell Trump that this is what happened and that they can't tolerate it anymore. There will be no negotiations. Everything is ruined and Ukraine is to blame for everything. They're doing all this because they have no room to maneuver. They either need to go to negotiations or not go at all. If they don't go, there will be some consequences. It's necessary to make sure there are no consequences. It's important to give Trump completely accurate information about how things really are. So that Trump comes out with some kind of angry tweet. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised if he does come out with an angry tweet. But Dasha, what's the most important thing here? The most important thing is this. No matter how hard all these Russian security forces try, no matter what they do, Putin has a huge pile of problems. But Putin can't wage this war forever. He doesn't have the money for this war. He is becoming heavily dependent on many other players, to the point where he's now more dependent on North Korea than on Russia's own defense industry. He can no longer wage a war of this intensity, and he needs to bring it to an end. If he thinks he can win this war or somehow turn the situation in his favor in the few months he has left, he is gravely mistaken because his generals, traitor generals, Gerasimov betrayed him a long time ago. He gives him completely inaccurate, unnecessary, and absolutely false information. There's nothing there, no such colossal advance. 1% over all these years. 1. Yes. And the American Institute for the Study of War states the following. At the current accelerated pace, it would take Putin and his army 99 years to take all of Ukraine. Putin won't live that long. That's clear to everyone. And I think that whoever comes after Putin in Russia, or even together with Putin, won't live long enough to fulfill all these wet dreams of theirs. So, well, listen. They're provoking a special strike. This has happened before. It has happened on the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They made a mess at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant when they started this whole bloody mess called the full-scale invasion. They've already staged provocations in the Kursk region near the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant. All of this has happened before. But now there's a specific goal. There's only one goal. To get Trump out of Ukraine, to finish what they started, the so-called special operation as they see it, and moreover, to squeeze out some extra perks from the Americans and to make sure that the idea of a meeting between Putin and Zelensky never even crosses Trump's mind. That's the only thing they want. They don't need anything else.
Yes, Sasha, that's true. That's their strategy because yesterday, on the eve of Ukraine's Independence Day, Trump made a statement saying that in 2 weeks he'll resolve it. Sanctions and tariffs, he used those two terms, or I'll walk away. And I'll say this isn't my war. And most likely Putin is counting on the second option for Trump. Sasha, so I definitely wanted to ask about Putin. I have one question about that for the end. But now I want to talk about logistics, about the paralysis of the skies, about railway hubs, and how much all of this is affecting the Russians. Right now, everyone is reporting that the shutdowns at Pulkovo, Sheremetyevo, and Vnukovo are because of drones. This is the new standard of risk for Russia. Next, the railway hubs and stations. So right now, we've basically created railway collapses. Paralysis? For example, yesterday, for 2 days, the Russians couldn't buy tickets. They were crowding at the railway hubs. They can't do anything. In your opinion, without exaggeration, how realistic are strikes deep in the rear? Moscow, St. Petersburg, air traffic collapses, railway collapses. Do these demoralize the elites and the population? And how could this actually affect Putin and speed up the negotiation agenda for the Kremlin, or on the contrary, slow it down?
The elites are not demoralized. We shouldn't indulge in any illusions here. For one simple reason. The elite, the real elite, have their own business jets. Granted, there are some fuel issues, but there's enough fuel for this elite. They have business jets. This greatly demoralizes the Russian people, the average Russian who votes for Putin and is told that everything is fine, that everything is calm in Magadan, that the war hasn't come to Moscow. It's already arrived long ago, both in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. Look, Dasha, all of Russia is Moscow-centric. Moscow-centric. You've noticed, haven't you, that those lines for gasoline on the highway stretch from Moscow through Rostov to Krasnodar. Everything goes through Moscow. All supplies go through Moscow. The entire railway system is centered in Moscow. All air transportation is centered in Moscow, both civil and commercial. Everything is tied to Moscow. If you destroy the node or nodes that connect to Moscow, the most important ones, that's it. There's nothing left. That's when a passenger, transport, and food collapse begins. That's when a trade collapse, an economic collapse, and so on begin. But it should also be added that every such attack and destruction of this or that target, whether it's a railway track or the shutdown, the stoppage of an airport in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, or anywhere else, means only one thing. Russia loses huge amounts of money every day. Russia loses tens and tens of billions every hour. Every hour. And Putin has no money. His national wealth fund is practically burned out. All his reserves are in Chinese yuan. But there's another point, even more so. There's a huge problem there. It's clear that petro-rubles aren't working. They're not working. Oil revenues have dropped by 30%. That's an obvious fact. But there's another important, significant detail. It comes down to the fact that if Putin doesn't have money, he'll have to get it from somewhere. The only option he has to take this money is to go after his more or less well-off population, from the middle class and up, who have 40 trillion rubles sitting in Russian banks. And for this reason, over the past week, Russians have suddenly started pulling their money out of the banks. In just 1 week, Russians have taken 500 billion rubles, half a trillion, away from Vladimir Putin. Yes, so this is a huge deal, literally $500 billion. We're talking about Russians sensing that the country is in deep trouble, that Putin will trick them, that Putin will deceive them, that he'll simply take and seize their investments, their money, and their deposits. Because he needs war, he needs to fight, he needs power, and to extend his rule through war. He dreams about it, he fantasizes about it, and so now he will do everything possible to get that money. Who will give him the money? No one, except the Russians themselves. Do Russians want to give their money to Vladimir Putin? No. That's why those who are smarter are already taking their money out. And those who are foolish will leave it until the very last moment and everything will be lost. Putin will take everything, all the deposits, or let's put it this way, he will freeze them. He'll freeze them and never give them back. This is a very important point. This is more important than all the airports and all the railways, because for the first time, Russians have felt that the war hasn't just arrived, but that it's time to grab your cash, pack your bags, and get the hell out, or sit on those bags and wait for the right moment.
Yes, this is simply a formal campaign to drain the energy from Russia's economy. Sasha, I can't help but ask you a question that our subscribers asked me to pass on. You see, they love our tandem, Dasha plus Sasha, Sasha plus Dasha, and they specifically asked me to pose this question on Independence Day. In your opinion, how realistic is the scenario? Do you remember that film about Osama bin Laden, 0-30? And everyone is discussing how realistic it is because the war could end quickly if target number one simply ceased to exist. In your opinion, is this a realistic scenario for intelligence agencies or not? Or is it just a utopia?
No, look, for intelligence agencies, everything is realistic. For good intelligence agencies, and Ukrainian intelligence agencies are good ones. For the Americans, it's a very realistic scenario. The issue here isn't with the intelligence agencies. If the intelligence agencies were given the task, they would try to carry it out. That's not the point. Moreover, there have been assassination attempts on Putin. There have been attempts on Putin's life, and not just one. There have been several attempts on Vladimir Putin. And this has been discussed in the Kremlin, including there. The question is actually something else entirely. The point is, I think, first of all, that no one wants this kind of precedent to appear in the world. It's not about something like this happening specifically in Russia. The thing is, this makes both the West and the East very uneasy. No one wants something like this to happen because many people there have their own skeletons in the closet, so they're all wary. But there's another more serious point. Look, it seems to me that there is a person who is very much against such scenarios and who will defend Putin to the very end. And it's not about the fact that he likes him endlessly. It's not about this person wanting negotiations with Putin and so on. It's just that he is focused on interacting with Russia and specifically with Putin, and that person is Donald Trump. And there's nothing you can do about it and nothing you can change with this Trump, at least for the next 3.5 years. But what would I like to say? You know, while we're discussing these things, Putin himself, as far as I understand, is planning an attack on a new country, a new state. Moreover, logic tells me that an attack or an attempted attack on the leader of that country is being planned. On the leader of that country. And it's not Vladimir Zelensky, although Putin has tried and I'm sure is still trying to target our president as well, to destroy him in some way, but he won't succeed. I'm talking about Azerbaijan and Ilham Aliyev. Ilham Aliyev recently made a statement that war is coming soon, that we must prepare for war and that the only hope lies with the Azerbaijani people. In Baku, they understood perfectly well that as soon as they turned toward the United States, turned away from Russia and allowed Trump and America to handle the security issue in the South Caucasus, after that, Putin would do everything possible, first of all, to destroy Armenia. To once again install its own pro-Kremlin government there, and secondly, to destroy Aliyev and Azerbaijan. But in doing so, the Kremlin would then have to face the Turkish army. But this confrontation is inevitable, because Turkey and Russia have fought each other more than Russia has fought with anyone else. That's why I believe that in the near future, we will witness a major confrontation, a large-scale, protracted war in the South Caucasus orchestrated by Russia. We can already see that in Armenia. Where the 102nd base is located in Gyumri, the Russian military base, there have been protests. And the Armenians are trying to kick the Russians the hell out of Gyumri, out of Armenia. That's another flashpoint. So right now, if the war stops or is frozen or whatever happens, though I don't believe in that, but many people are talking about exactly this scenario of Russia against Ukraine, Putin will immediately turn his attention, having freed up enormous resources. he will immediately focus on the South Caucasus. That's Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And I hope, I am even sure, firstly, that Turkey won't allow it, that there will be a long drawn-out war and a clash with Turkish forces. And secondly, that the Americans won't let Vladimir Putin do this either. But the fact that this scenario, in my opinion, is inevitable and that it needs to be considered is a fact. That's something I would watch very closely, very diligently.
And right now, as you speak, there are protests taking place in Armenia against Russian military bases on the territory of that country. Friends, to sum up, we are attacking right now, as everyone is already reporting. Telegram channels are reporting a massive drone attack on Russia. Oil refineries in Syzran have been hit. There are explosions in various regions: the Moscow region, Leningrad region, Syzran, Belgorod, Kursk region, Kurchatov, Tver, Leningrad, Smolensk, and Bryansk. We are acting precisely, selectively, and are indeed attacking only military targets. Friends, please like this video. Sasha, the final word is yours as we wrap up today's stream.
Friends, I just want to wish all of us resilience, patience, and to do just one thing. Truly, to endure, get through this, and keep on living. Because that will be, the scariest gift to Vladimir Putin from all of Ukraine, from each of us. To live a normal life right after, and outlast Vladimir Putin and his regime. That's what I wish for all of you. Truly.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Oh, that's it. Those tanks are on fire, too. Hope it doesn't blow up right now. 31.
October and the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant is under attack.
This is fucking guys. Good morning to you.
Russia blew up the transformer in Kurchatov itself. A provocation to blame Ukraine. Everything is burning. Moscow and St. Petersburg are in a panic. At the same time, there are SU strikes on Moscow and St. Petersburg. Explosions are thundering in the Leningrad region. Railway junctions have been blown up. The Syzran oil refinery is on fire.
Something's shooting over there. It hurts.
That's it. It started. That's it.
That's it.
Ust-Luga is in flames. The airports in Moscow and St. Petersburg are paralyzed. In Crimea, trains carrying military equipment have been blown up.
We will discuss all this with top analyst Alexander Demchenko
right now.
Looks like we're about to get kicked off the construction site. That's it. Those tank cars are on fire, too. I wish I had seen that.
Lightning, friends. Today, the sky over Russia has lit up with new explosions. Moscow, St. Petersburg explosions, they are paralyzed. Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Pulkovo airports have stopped operating because explosions are going off everywhere. There are fires in the Kaluga region. The Syzran oil refineries are burning. The strategic port of Ust-Luga has been attacked. The Novatek gas terminal has simply been blown up. The Kremlin's energy empire is collapsing right before our eyes.
I don't think wandering around the terminal is a great idea either, Right now, it's quite an interesting vibe.
Important facilities, oil refineries have been attacked. In Novoshakhtinsk, it's been burning for 3 days straight. Everyone there is crying and weeping. Gas terminals, factories, railway hubs have been attacked. There's an aviation collapse, panic in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Airports have been shut down. Let's discuss all this with the well-known top analyst, Alexander Demchenko. Sasha, welcome.
Hello, Dasha. Hello, everyone. All right, Dasha, let's get started.
Friends, please write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Glory to the armed forces of Ukraine, and we're starting with an explosion. It's been a while since anything hit Moscow or St. Petersburg. There's panic in St. Petersburg, airports have been shut down, and the largest gas processing complex in Europe is burning in Ust-Luga. Now, it will be difficult for the Kremlin not only to wage war, but also to trade fuel. Sasha, how do you assess today's strikes?
This is really a blow, right to the gut. Ukraine continues to destroy the energy sectors of the Russian Federation. We're not just saying, this is some kind of gas terminal, the Novatek station. Yes, the terminal has been destroyed. Listen, an enterprise has been destroyed, a facility belonging to Gennady Timchenko. Let's call things by their proper names. Gennady Timchenko is the oligarch closest to Putin, who sponsors Putin and directly builds various things for him. Some factories, ships, even palaces in Gelendzhik, together with the Rotenbergs. Gennady Timchenko is Putin's closest friend when it comes to hockey, and in everything else too. That's it. A direct strike has already been delivered. In other words, they are striking at Putin, at his inner circle, at his oligarchs. Not at some imaginary ones, not at some oligarchs who were once close to Putin. Today, a strike was delivered directly against Putin's closest circle.
Furthermore, we must not forget, and I believe this is important, a transformer near the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant was damaged.
So these are not just strikes against the energy sector. Putin, what? Recently, he was speaking through Alexander Lukashenko's mouth. Yes, using his mouth, saying that Russia was preparing strikes. Putin was simply agitating to strike the Oreshniks on Vnukovo. Did that happen? It did. Did Lukashenko make that statement a couple of days ago? Lukashenko made that statement a couple of days ago. It's a kind of blackmail, you know. We can go all the way, we can parse, we can play. All in, that's what they were relaying from the Kremlin through Lukashenko. Well, there you go. You're blackmailing with nuclear ashes. You're constantly staging provocations at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There you have it. But I'm more than sure, Dasha, that in reality, it's not even Ukraine. It struck the Kursk nuclear power plant. Once again, it's Putin, his troops, his army. Just like they did with the airport you asked about. Yes, let's not forget that. Vnukovo, a strike, a missile strike. A Ukrainian drone is shot down by a missile, and the missile basically falls on people. The Ukrainian drone shot down by a Russian missile falls just 200 meters from the terminal. It's the same thing now. Weren't they bombing the entire Kursk region with their guided aerial bombs from the air? I mean, the Russian army, the armed forces, the air force, were they bombing? They were bombing. Did they wipe the Kursk region off the face of the earth? They wiped it out. Are they still wiping out the Kursk region because they can't completely drive out the Ukrainian soldier? They really are still wiping it out. The Kursk region, they're destroying their own people. And a Russian missile hit the nuclear power plant. Putin is striking. There's only one question. Is it because of incompetence? Or is it because someone wants to stage a nuclear provocation, blame everything on Ukraine, carry out the biggest possible terrorist attack, stir up Trump, and tell him, look at what's happening. Here are our energy facilities. Here are our nuclear sites. What kind of negotiations can there be? Maybe this is partly a plan to sabotage negotiations with Ukraine, negotiations that Putin never intended to enter into and still doesn't?
Yes, that's absolutely right. In reality, they're the ones striking the Kursk nuclear power plant on purpose, creating a precedent to make it look like Ukraine did it. This has already been reported, including by the Center for Countering Disinformation, that this is the work of the Russians. They strike themselves and then they accuse Ukraine themselves. Well, now let's talk about where we strike. Sasha, I saw that Magyar has prepared a whole list for Independence Day. Recently, and this is actually really important, we've been striking oil refineries. Almost all of them in the European part of Russia have been attacked. And so Magyar made a statement. The former Medvedchuk-owned oil refinery in Novoshakhtinsk has been burning for over 60 hours, over 60 kal. Next, on August 14th, we hit the Lukoil Volgograd refinery, then Druzhba. The Hungarians say that restoration of the pipeline will take 5 days. There is no confirmation of it being restarted, writes Magyar. On August 20th, the Novoshakhtinsk oil products plant, then Druzhba, then what is called the oil refinery. Magyar says, we're blowing everything up, go home Russians, that's what Magyar reports. And now, as I understand it, today we also attacked the Syzran oil refinery and Port Ust-Luga at the same time. Sasha, lately we've been hitting oil refineries very intensively. What do you think is the reason for this? Because for a while, this wasn't happening.
Rostov, Saratov, Ryazan. We just need to add that this is a huge list that comes to mind right now. Oil refineries and stations that are being destroyed or significantly damaged by Ukraine, its armed forces, and its special services. Let's not forget that it's only the SBU. Vasyl Malyuk's operations have taken out more than 200 Russian targets, not just energy facilities, but also defense-related ones. And other intelligence agencies, both military and foreign, have also made a huge contribution. A significant contribution to this effort. But what does this tell us? Look, right now on the streets, on the roads of Russia, there are massive lines everywhere. Trucks are lined up, cars, passenger vehicles are all waiting. Everyone is looking for gasoline. In 3 regions of Russia, not counting the occupied Ukrainian Crimea, although there's an energy crisis there too, the fuel crisis has already hit hard. And I've been saying since April, look, there will soon be an energy catastrophe in Russia. There will be a fuel crisis. Get ready. Stock up, get some bottles, collect any kind of metal cans, anything you can use to store gasoline. Well, now they're giving out 10 liters per coupon. But what is 10 liters for a truck? It's nothing. That's just enough to drive a little and then stop again. Until the next gas station, if you're lucky. That's why there's a fuel crisis in Russia right now. What did Ukraine do? Ukraine deliberately started targeting energy facilities. Putin isn't enforcing any kind of moratorium. Ukraine started striking energy facilities successfully. Oil refineries have shut down. Friends, for those who don't understand, let me just explain what this means. So, look, everyone is used to thinking that the Russian oil sector, or let's say the energy sector, is all about profits from gas and oil, from sales. Friends, look. What is a gas station? A filling station. Let me explain to you. 60% of the price when you buy a liter of gasoline, 60% of that is excise, it's tax. And now imagine that there's no tax coming from each of these. That 3 regions are already not paying taxes. That all of this is collapsing. The Russian Federation is facing major economic problems. Putin has big problems. He doesn't have money for the war. And Ukraine is doing everything to make him exhaust his last reserves and force him to go to those damn negotiations with Zelensky. But this time to real negotiations, to negotiations where he has to make concessions. To negotiations without ultimatums and without threats and without blackmail and without these stinking manipulations with Anchorage until today. Just normal business negotiations about the future. And not about the future of Ukraine, but about the future of the region. Because Ukraine attacked Russian energy facilities. Because Ukraine, which is defending its territory where Russia has advanced in recent years by as much as 1% of its potential. President Zelensky spoke about this today. Because Ukraine, which has developed over the last year and a half, the Flamingo missile, the Sarmat missile, the missile, directly the long-range Neptune, the regular Neptune, turning this board upside down to hell. And it demonstrates to the Kremlin, to Putin, to his entire entourage, to all his well-fed oligarchs who funnel him money, every single time for him and his family, for their existence, for power, for life. Look, guys, we can do it this way too. Without American help, we can do it on our own. We can strike on our own. We can hit like this too. And they will strike first with drones, and soon there will be missiles too. And I'm not saying this because I'm calling for anything. It's just a fact. It's a fact. Ukraine has developed, Ukraine has tested, Ukraine is already striking. Ukraine has the strongest drone story. Ukraine will have the strongest missile story. With American help or without American help. And what are they all going to do about it? That's a big question for Russia. And Putin will have to answer this question in the near future. If he doesn't answer, there will be consequences. Because gifts like today, Dasha, these gifts will happen more and more often, every time, every month, more and more frequently. It won't be just Russia striking Ukraine. Ukraine will respond because all of us are simply fed up with what Putin and his troops are doing.
Sasha, I really like the situation with the series of strikes on the Druzhba pipeline at Necha. In this way, we are systematically destroying the Druzhba oil pipeline, which today supplies oil to our 2 adversaries in Slovakia and Hungary, who are blocking, especially Hungary, Ukraine's accession to the European Union. And as for Orban, well, I won't even start talking about his ties to Russia. I also had this thought, like Piotr Seater, I think, wrote a post yesterday, like, what is this teaching us something? Ukraine is attacking the Druzhba oil pipeline. Yes, how dare they? To which all the European leaders, well, many of them replied, well, you stand in solidarity with the European Union. So we are exactly as much in solidarity with you as you are with us. And I think the Ukrainian ambassador Vyar wrote that solidarity and Hungary are like goulash and vegetarianism. So basically, they totally trolled the Hungarians. What do you have to say about our strikes on the Druzhba oil pipeline?
Look, it's clear that Orban is furious. Orban is furious because he gets a huge percentage, I think about 10% of all Russian oil. Viktor Orban gets it. He's sitting on the transit on the pipeline. By the way, a lot of people used to sit on the pipeline, remember? Medvedchuk and so on. Orban is sitting on the pipeline in Hungary. There you go. They're getting a huge percentage. Orban, well, as people say, is it true or is it just a rumor? We don't know. We don't have any documents in hand. No one has seen them. No one has held them, so to speak. Maybe just a few individuals have. Orban, as they say, was recruited by the Russian and even the Soviet KGB back in the late 1980s. That's why he's been on their payroll for a long time. He's been, excuse my language, leeching off Putin, the FSB, and Lubyanka for a long time now. So everything is clear here. Yes, Ukraine is striking at a friendship that is becoming more and more, let's be honest, unfriendly by the day. But if the issue is about Russian transit, and if the issue is that Hungary and Slovakia, especially Hungary, cannot accept, approve, or agree to anti-Russian measures and anti-Russian sanctions, and this is solely because Russia supplies Hungary. No, well, let's remove this train car bubble. If it's all about oil, fine, then let's take the oil out of the equation. Then you'll let Ukraine into the European Union. Then you'll give Ukraine all the necessary weapons. Then you'll impose sanctions against the Russian Federation. Or maybe it's not about the oil at all. Maybe the real issue is the document you signed, Viktor Orban, many decades ago, when you agreed to become an agent or collaborator of the Soviet KGB. What is the real problem here? Or is it that with Russian, with Putin's money, with money from Putin's oligarchs, Hungary, and specifically Orban's government supports his entire entourage, his whole apparatus, and in this way they live a normal, good, happy life? By the way, let's not forget about Ukrainian Transcarpathia, over which Orban has had his own particular plans for a long time, and who, behind Ukraine's back, behind closed doors, negotiated with Putin at the start of the invasion about carving up the Ukrainian state. Or have we forgotten about that? Or have we forgotten the letters from the State Duma of the Russian Federation back in 2014, including those sent to Hungary, where there was an official proposal to divide Ukraine into several parts? Have we forgotten that? You know what I liked next in all of this? In this whole situation with Orban, I liked Trump's reaction. As strange as that may sound. Trump wrote, he printed out, whether it was a letter or some kind of printed message, or maybe it was a tweet. Who knows what it was from Orban, but Trump made, let's say, a statement there. I'm very angry, you know? I'm very angry. I can't stand listening to all this. Tell the Slovaks that I'm their friend. What was Trump's reaction after that? None. He called Zelensky, he passed something on to Ukraine, the State Department made some kind of statement. He started blackmailing Ukraine live on air, or making some kind of threats. No, Trump didn't do anything. Just as, by the way, he didn't do anything regarding the destroyed American, or rather damaged American, Flex Electronics plant in Vnukovo, which Putin struck. So what about those security guarantees, Donald? Wherever there is an American investor, wherever there is an American factory, Putin won't strike. Well, he did strike. Once again, because let's be honest, since 2014, Putin has repeatedly struck American factories. He has struck Polish factories too, a NATO member country. Poland doesn't really like to respond either, right? Over there already. Drones are flying in 100 kilometers from Warsaw, and Poland, you know, has very, as they say, oh, what's the word, Dasha? Help me out. They have a very big sense of concern. Deep, deep concern. Yes, deep concern. They are deeply dismayed and concerned about what happened. And Trump is deeply concerned, but nothing is happening. But the key thing I want to say is that apparently Ukraine and Zelensky have decided to take matters into their own hands. We've probably all heard these statements in the Wall Street Journal today. We don't know if it's true or not. Listen, American publications are also playing their own game. They are also divided into certain factions, into certain groups, certain clans. There are certain money bags behind them. They have their own story. But the Wall Street Journal published a very interesting piece today where they reported that, yes, on the one hand, Ukraine is receiving over 800 missiles. Short range up to 400 kilometers. But on the other hand, Donald Trump and the Department of Defense directly, the very same official who recently blocked the supply to Ukraine, as you may recall,